I was glad to hear him, but I didn't really learn anything new because he's been listening to me and he's been producing this show with all these experts for, he's been listening to me since 11 years ago when I became a hired caregiver. And I never told him where I was or who I was serving, but I could describe a general situation. And I almost always served right alongside family members. So I was hired to come in. Sometimes I was the first one. Sometimes it had been years and they had all they kind of had the routine ready. Um, and in a strange way, I was really glad to hear my husband say that everything he talked about, just the difficulties, understanding, being a very intelligent man and very learned and medically trained, but when it was dad with Alzheimer's, it was like, come on, dad, snap out of it, and I was like, this is just very realistic. I'm glad I was there. I turned to one person. I said, I'm sure we don't get to mob him after he speaks, but I have these 2 books I'd like to give him. And he goes, oh, perfect. I'm driving him back to the hotel. So that's me and my books. Your books are nice, thick business cards to let people know that you have many, many endeavors, many things that you see through. And I asked you before we went live, what are you doing to have fun? And you are right now just trying to keep everything going well. You have your day job and you've got your weekends and then your evenings, and now you're on aspects of aging for a resource website, Aging Better Network. And as you know, I'm hit with allergies. You aren't. So you've got 58 minutes. Take it away, Sky Bergman.
Well, first of all, thanks so much, Christine, for having me on. I really appreciate it. And I'm super excited about the book launch. I started this whole project, about 12 years ago when I was approaching 50. I'm 58 now. And I was looking for positive role models of aging and just not finding them out there in the media at all. I mean, everything that I was seeing was all the things that we could do to avoid aging and anti-aging creams and any of the films that I saw were all the negative aspects of aging. Nothing showed the positive side. And I was lucky enough in my own family to have an amazing role model of my grandmother who is approaching 100 and still working out at the gym. And she didn't start working out until she was 80. So it's never too late to start something new. And I just thought, I know there's other people out there in the world like my grandmother who could be an inspiration for me as I age. And, let's face it, the one thing we all have in common is that we age every day. So rather than fearing it, we should embrace it. And I had no idea I was going to make a film at the time. I just thought this is my personal quest. And I teach at a university here, Cal Poly in San Luis Obispo. And I always tell my students, the more personal, the more universal the message becomes. And I think that I just was on this personal quest to kind of find out what could the second half of my life be like after 50. And so that sent me on a quest of interviewing 40 people with a collective life experience of 3,000 years. It took me 4 years to do that. And, what a gift that was to put everything away and really just listen to people. Because I always say that everyone has a story to tell if we just take the time to listen. And, we often don't do that. And I think that I read somewhere that the last 100 years is the first time in human history that we've looked to anyone other than our elders for advice. And I really feel like we're suffering. I mean, there's so many stories of resilience and so many things that we can learn. And we tend to Google it or look it up in other ways and not actually talk to somebody about what they've experienced in their own life. And I think a good reminder of it was the 80th anniversary of D-Day the other day, like last week. And you see all these wonderful veterans who are still alive that went to France and celebrated, and what their stories of resilience must have been like. I mean, just what they saw, what they went through. And I think it's good that now we are seeing more of that in the media. We are starting to see more stories of older adults and what later life can look like, and also honoring the stories of what those people went through. And so I did the film, the Lives Will Live film, which is now still on PBS. We just got our contract extended for another 4 years, which is amazing. And I had a wonderful run with that. I'm doing a lot of intergenerational work with the film. And I had all these people that kept saying, well, we should you should have a book. Why don't you do a book? And so the book is launching. The soft launch is now, the hard launch is July 1st. So I'm excited to be on here to give a little bit about the book and kind of share a little bit about that.
You even, it seems like I saw a post that you were like, hey, you can get a deal on the book this weekend or something. And I'm like, oh my goodness. But wait, there's more. I mean, it's like all that is happening. Sky Bergman, I would like to formally introduce you to Steve Berger. And Steve Berger has already entered his greeting into the chat because we are live talking about lives well lived. And he has been on Aspects of Aging 2 times so far. And he is such a champion of, wow, what's the new resource? What's the new person, who is offering a course, a movie. I mean, you're a filmmaker who's offering a book. So I just have a whole bunch of questions right now. And Steve, I invite you to ask any questions I can't think of. Are you saying that this is the first book you have authored?
Yes, I had a book of my photographic work, but this is the first book that I've authored, and it's also the first film that I've done. So I kind of feel like my grandmother opened the door to a whole new, we like to say third act, because I'm still teaching, but I retired and teaching part-time, but I have retired from teaching and really was looking for what the next thing was that I'm going to do. And it's definitely filmmaking, and my passion is really anything that has to do with connecting generations. And so I was lucky enough when I grew up that I grew up in a 4-generational household, not only with my grandparents, but also my great grandmother was alive until I was 19 and lived with my grandparents. And I lived with my grandparents and my parents. So we had a very unique situation, I think, for my age group. I think that most of my friends didn't have that. And I felt so lucky that I had this connection to all these older adults in my life. I never really thought about it. I think just because I was living it. And, I realized that most people don't have that. And when I finished making the film, I was lucky enough to collaborate with a woman here at the university who teaches a class called The Psychology of Aging. And we were trying to figure out how could we work together to make some kind of an intergenerational project, because one of her students had actually seen the Lives Will Live film when it was playing in the local theater here and said to her, oh my goodness, you need to go see this film. It's exactly what you're teaching about. And so when she realized we taught at the same university, we thought we've got to make something happen. The serendipity of this is too much to, not do something about it. And so for the past 7 or 8 years, we've been working with students, pairing students and older adults. So they watch the film. We have a big Q&A. And then we pair the students and older adults, and they use the questions that I formulated. I took about 6 months to formulate all the questions that I asked everyone in the film. I had like a list of 20 questions as a starting point. And so, I think one of the hardest things is when you meet somebody or you're trying to collect their story or you're trying to even just get to know them, what questions do you ask? To say to somebody, oh, tell me something about yourself, that's too vague and too open-ended. And I think having this list of 20 questions just gave people a starting point to have a bilateral conversation. So it wasn't just the students asking the older adults questions, it was back and forth. And then at the end of the quarter, we have a big wrap party where the students do a presentation and the older adults get up and talk about what they learned. And of course, the biggest takeaway is that we have far more in common than our differences, and our biggest difference is age. And I do feel like we're living in such an age segregated society at this point that whatever I can do to connect generations is super important. And through this project, we're connecting generations, one story and one connection at a time. And like any other stereotype or ism, when you know somebody from that other group, it's really hard to have a stereotype about them. And so in many ways, that's a wonderful way to combat the stereotype of ageism in both directions, just by bringing people together. So that's been a wonderful core for everything that I'm doing from here on out with my work.
I am near your category, near enough. I'll be 65 on my next birthday. So I this is the year that I sing the Beatles song. Will you still need me? Will you still feed me? I took that negatively. Like, you have to feed me because I'm 64. It's like no one's feeding your grandmother, But my husband said, you got to listen to the lyrics, you got to read it through. Yeah. And it also includes, if I stay out till 3 a.m., are you going to lock me out? And I'm like, okay, so it isn't quite that. The phrase that comes to mind is good-natured ribbing, which I see an elbow coming out, kind of like, ha, 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 ha. That kind of a laugh. Maybe it was just, I don't know, an American thing, vaudeville or something, to be going, ha, ha, ha. But I'm going to switch it just a little bit and do a pattern interrupt, is what I've learned from my hubby producer, D. Scott Smith. I like to say his name and that he's doing this so that no one mistakes all the things that goes right for something that I did. It's my guest and my husband. I show up. And I'm going to do a pattern interrupt and call it good-natured bullying. The person who's doing it is like, I didn't mean any lasting harm. I don't, whatever. But just that, the constant barrage of, oh, you're old. So that means, and then all these words that someone would fill into the blank would be like this horrible magnet that I saw at the local store that was about as, is the word derisive? It was just a terrible drawing, and it looked like if you wanted to make fun of a teacher and you are a seventh grader, you would draw a picture like this up on the board before they got into the classroom to definitely take their status as authority or as a valuable human being and put it down in the garbage can. That sort of a thing. I'll just be really blunt and say, you've told this person you don't have worth like you used to because you are old. And as everyone is starting to learn, so when do you plan to not participate in life anymore? When do you plan to not have a relationship anymore? Will it be when you're 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90? And it's just like, but they're old. I'm not.
Like, well, and I think, there's
you're going to age.
There's a really great organization called Changing the Narrative, which Janine Vanderberg started. And I think that that's really important. She did a whole campaign, I think it was last year, about birthday cards and, how as we age,
Jan Golden.
birthday cards are pretty horrible, but how can we make them positive? And how can we, even in our own language and the semantics that we use and the way that we talk about aging in a positive way? So, and catching other people that are using language that is, not the most positive in terms of aging. I think that we all tend to do that, and really thinking about that. I mean, I think of Ashton Applewhite and her book, This Chair Rocks, and how she really calls to task some of the things that we say, and how that hurts everyone as we're aging. Because again, we're all aging every day. So we're only hurting our future self when we have practiced the stereotype of ageism, and I think that anything that we can do to put a positive spin on things, and I think in a realistic way. I mean, one of the people that I interviewed for the film was Lou Tadone, Lucky Louie. And he was a pediatrician for many years. And then in his, I think when he retired from being a pediatrician, he started working with his daughter, making fresh mozzarellas for his daughter's deli. He used to do that when he was a teenager, because his parents had an Italian deli. And so it just came naturally to him. And I loved it. And I would go over there once or twice a week and hang out with him. And, when he was 97, I remember going over there and saying, "Hey, Lou, how are you doing? How are you feeling today?" And he said, "Well, it's not like when I was 95. And I think that was his way of saying, we all are going to age every day. We're aging. Our bodies maybe are not going to do the same thing they did a couple of years ago. But what can we do to be grateful for what we still have, how we can maneuver through this life?" And I think that our attitude is so super important when we're looking at aging. It's really all about attitude. And it's not just our attitude, like you've alluded to before, it's also about the attitude of the people around us. So one thing is our own attitude of what do we think of as old for ourselves, and when do we start telling ourselves that we can't do something, versus having that attitude of why not instead of why, and really following our passion and knowing that sure, there are some things we won't be able to do physically, but what are the things that we can still do, and how can we still participate and have a sense of purpose and have a sense of being? And then I think the other thing is educating people around us that our age should not be a determining factor of what we can and cannot do. And I think that's super important. I mean, I remember one time when my grandmother, which she hardly ever got sick, but she happened to be in the hospital. I think she was 100 at the time. And the doctor came in, and I was there. And instead of speaking to my grandmother, immediately started speaking to me. And I said, she is making an assumption based on the fact that he looked at her chart and saw how old she was, or the number of her age. And I said, she is a patient. You need to talk to her. And she said to him, "You're fired." And he said, "No, you can't fire me." And she said, "No, I just did. You're fired." And got a different doctor. I mean, it just, I think that was a doctor, somebody who should be listening to patients, but immediately, because of the number he saw on the chart, decided that she was not the person that he should talk to. And I think, this is part of, like, as the granddaughter, I made it very clear I was the person around her. No, I am not the person to talk to. She is. And I think that is really important, like really making sure that we pay that respect to people, and that, we let them make their own decisions and have those choices. And I think that's super important. And then also not looking at a number and making an assumption based on that number of what that person's capabilities are, because everybody has different capabilities at different ages. And I think, that is something to really remember. And we tend to forget that in this society.
Oh, Sky, I want to introduce you to someone who's been jumping up and down. He's excited to be here. This is Russ Hedge. He
Hi,
is
Russ.
also our friend, but we get to see him in person much more often. We're less than an hour apart. Oh, golly, we're probably like 20 minutes. If the traffic lights are with us. And Russ Hedge also does live shows several times a week. And you were mentioning that you haven't really actually done this sort. Usually podcasts are recorded. And I just like the unexpectedness of a live situation. I've had people who are driving in the car going, I can't really see you right now, but I have to get home from work so I can get on the computer. And one person, it was a black screen the whole time, but we could hear his voice. I've got to
Mhm.
get him back on. Russ Hedge is also looking forward to his birthday on the longest, lightest day of the year.
Nice.
Here up in the 45th parallel. It stays pretty much the same in Southern California, I hear, but it'll be the brightest day, and I'm gonna pretend the Jan Golden. Do you remember the name that she gives to her series of cards? But they are definitely age positive
Mhm.
statements.
Mhm.
And so I'm just imagining, you know, hey, Russ, I am so glad that this world has had every year of you in it. I mean, just you don't even have to say, wow, that's a lot of candles, or good for you, you're still kicking, or something like that. Your story about your grandma firing the doctor and saying, you're not on my case anymore. There's got to be someone else. I bet that other someone else was given a little more, it's
A
like,
little more heads up. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's
And
like,
was a much better
do
doctor
not
for my grandmother.
disregard
Right.
this person.
Yeah.
I usually, I'm good at forgetting. If you need something forgotten, just tell it to me and I'll forget it for you. So I'm going to pick this up really fast and we'll get right back to you. Oh, good. We have plenty of time for everything, everything. In this book, which this is my everything that was in my brain after being hired as a caregiver in almost 100 different homes.
Mhm.
I put it all here. First, it was in my purple bag as I would sit and eat my sandwich between shifts at one house and another house. But there was commonalities in aging that I saw done right by my people, the ones that I assisted, and also by the families. And then there were also concerns, or is this a thing? They would turn to me because I was wearing a badge. I was the only one in the home wearing a badge. It's like, is there something that helps with this? Or do other people experience this difficulty with navigating um, different, Medicare, Medicaid, whatever it is. And I would draw upon my teeny tiny bit of experience. And I thought, I want to know all these answers. I want to know them for other people. So I started this show, bringing in the resources, and I wrote down 52 different aspects of aging. And I've turned it to, how do you want to age? Take the helm, both hands, your emotional intelligence, use it, practice it. If you don't think you have any, if you just fake it for a while, you start to actually um, think first and then react, to respond and then react. And then the other is your relational resilience. As you hit something that you've not quite faced before, just in a new way. And one of them I have in here is being disregarded, like your grandmother, to have people just go, well, eh, um, you don't have, I call the hand pat. It's okay. We're going to take care of this. This is complicated and you don't need to bother yourself with that. And I learned not to take over for my people. I goofed a few times, but to um, assist them in their independence, to just be there to hand them something rather than going, I see that you are in your 90s. Therefore, I need to reach over and wipe food off your face. It's like, hey, you need a napkin. I would want someone to do that for me. at this age of 64, I would have wanted them to do it at 44. And most people will tell you that inside, it's like, I'm still an adult at any of the ages that I've been inside of me, even though what you're doing is you're making a decision on what's on my chart, or what's in my hair, or maybe I'm walking very slowly. I will segue back to the things that you've been saying. There have been two people that I've interacted with in person a lot, both of them having mobility issues due to physical situations that are very opposite. And both of them said what people usually say: I don't want to use a cane because it will make me look old. And so, what were these people's ages, or how young or how old do they feel? Are they perceived? The underlying thing is, if I look old, other people will look at me differently than they do when I don't have a cane in my hand. And I don't want them to treat me differently, to think differently about my abilities. It's a
But I think
it's a
that's a
process.
self-fulfilling prophecy in many ways. I think there are a
Yeah.
lot of people that use canes or use a walker who are, vivacious and out there, and it allows them to be more free because they are more steady
Yes.
that way. And I saw that with my
Yes.
grandmother. I saw that with my dad, who had a stroke and actually had to be in a wheelchair. Could use a walker for very sparing little jaunts, but he was a medical doctor, a geriatric physician until the day he died, working out of a wheelchair for the last 10 years of his life. And so I think that if more people, I think part of it is our own perception of ourselves as well. I think that when we have a more positive, perception of ourselves, I think that helps everyone else around us. And I certainly saw that with my grandmother, who, would go anywhere, but she felt much more confident she had one of those three-wheeled walkers, and she just would go everywhere with it. And without it, she wouldn't have had that mobility. And I think that we, as we age, we certainly have reasons for having those trade-offs, and we can either decide that we're not going to do anything, which I have seen other people do. They say, oh, well, I can't because I have a walker and whatever. Or they say, you know what? Okay, I've got to do this. It's going to take me a little bit longer. This is what would be the case with my dad. It would just take a little longer, but we're still going to do it. And we're just going to find out different ways. And I think, there were three things when I interviewed all the people for the film that really I found as common themes. One was having a sense of purpose, which, we need to have that sense of purpose every day. And that's true throughout our lives. So whether we're young or older or retiring, and looking at what is our third act or fourth act, fifth act, in some cases going to be, I think that that's vitally important, is to have a reason to get up every day and a reason for being and doing. And a lot of people, as they are older, their reason for being and doing, I have found, is giving back in some way. So volunteering and doing some work where they feel like they are validated and they're, I think, feel like a part of the community. I think that's really important. I think the second thing, and this has been shown in studies more recently, is having a good support system of friends or family. It doesn't have to be family. It could be friends. And, we've shown recently that if you're the loneliness factor and how many years that cuts off of your life versus having a good support system of friends. And then I think lastly is this sense of like resilience and positivity, and thinking about that many times in our lives, we can't control the things that have happened around us, but what we can control is our attitude about how we deal with those things. So I'm very much reminded of my dad having a stroke that left him. He had several strokes throughout his life. His first one in his 40s, and his last one finally was terminal. But the one that he had in his he was just before his 70th birthday, that left him in a wheelchair. He could have been a very bitter man. And he used to play guitar. He couldn't do that anymore. He used to do archery. He couldn't do that anymore. There's so many things that he couldn't do anymore. But what he realized was the one thing he could do and do well was still practice medicine. And that brought him great joy. And I think instead of looking at all the things that he couldn't do, he was such a positive role model of looking at what was still left that he could do and what brought him joy. And was able to have 10 wonderful years because of his attitude. You know, he could have been very bitter that he was left in a wheelchair and that he couldn't do the things that used to come naturally to him. But I think instead he, you know, took that moment to regroup and rethink about how can I live the rest of my life, live it fully to the best of my ability, given what I have left. And one of the things that I told him when I went, he lived in Philadelphia and I'm here in California. And when he had his stroke, I went back and saw him in the rehab facility. And, you know, he was depressed, which anyone that has had something like that, of course, you know, it's depressing. Your life is going to change. And I said to him, Dad, I want you to practice something. I want you to say something positive to everyone that comes in your room, whether it's, wow, that's a nice blouse that you're wearing, or you have a beautiful smile, or thank you for helping me, whatever. I want you to say at least one positive thing to everyone that's helping you. And if you do that, I know your attitude's going to change. You're going to just be much happier. And I said, I'm going to come back next week. If you have a positive attitude, I'll come back. And so I did that. I flew back from California to Philadelphia, and it was amazing, the transformation in a week. He really practiced that and practiced it till the day he died, which was being grateful and saying a nice thing to somebody else. I mean, just, you know, when you smile and you say something to somebody else that makes them smile, don't you feel better? It just like brightens the whole room for everyone. And I'm reminded of a phrase or quote that I leave above my desk, which is, a candle loses nothing by lighting another candle. And, you know, that saying a nice thing to somebody, making them smile, you lose nothing. And look at what a brighter world we have as a result. Yeah.
I word pictures can stick with me and can even break through in a tough moment. And I can just see, you know, one candle, you know, when we do something at church with candles, we're always warned, the person whose candle is not lit, you reach and draw the flame away so that they're not dumping, you know, some hot wax on you. And so I just imagine this person drawing a flame away and that candle undiminished. That's everything you're saying. If we were talking about moms at home with 4 children under the age of 5, all of this would apply to that person who's just like, you know, to a person who's been through horrific trauma. To each one that you're saying, you know, the purpose and the what I can do. And when someone comes in, give them a reason to smile, or, you know, show them that you notice them, you know, even just asking a question like, hey, did you just start your shift, you know, to your nurse is an open-ended kind of a, you know, they could say, nope. But mostly you're going to hear, oh, no, well, about 2.5 hours ago, it's like, did you get any breakfast? You know, that sort of a thing. It's like, they took interest in me. Somebody cares. And that person walks away, and then they're a lit flame that someone else can draw from. All of that. Every age. Oh, let's get together again in 10 years and make sure we're both doing wonderfully. Oh,
Indeed,
goodness.
indeed. Well, I think that, you know, there is something about that spreading that kindness. I mean, my grandmother, her motto was just to always be kind. And I think that goes for the way that you talk to people, the way that you interact with them. And, I always try to remember that you have no idea when you're interacting with somebody, maybe even a salesperson in a store, what their day was like. Maybe they, had a bad morning, and, they may be a little grumpy, and you go in there and just saying a kind word could make all the difference in the world. And I think, we minimize sometimes those kind of interactions, but I think those day-to-day interactions are super important. And I think the other thing that I'm reminded of, because of course my dad he ran several skilled nursing facilities, and he was always forever listening to everybody's stories. And I think that must be where my love of capturing people's stories came from, because my dad would come home from work and tell me all these great stories about his patients. And I think one of the things that's happened in our society is that we don't see people beyond just the surface. And so knowing some of those deeper stories really connects us with someone. And I think one of the things that my dad talked about is having people in his nursing facilities have photos of them from when they were younger and stories about who they were, so that when the nurses and when the physical therapists, when people came in, they saw them more as somebody that had an ailment or had something that was going on in that moment. They saw the breadth of the person. And I think we tend to treat people differently when we can see that breadth of that person, rather than just something that happens to be going on in that moment.
I'm imagining, well, and I just got a tissue. I had admitted to you earlier that it's like, wow, some allergy thing really hit. So I might be muting every once in a while and then making the face. How about you? Okay, so fascinating. I have never made a film. I have never had anything that I created put on such a massive platform as PBS. There must be so much that you could say about when you decided, when one morning you were like, no, I'm not going to do this. This is crazy. Or you were one of those people that, is like, nothing could stop me. Once I got the flywheel turning, the research that I did before this show, crazy. We were on a plane, and there was only so much time left. And I thought, well, I'll just hit one of those documentaries because you can. And I hit a documentary film on beginning to end of Reading Rainbow.
Oh,
And there's a
yeah,
little
yeah.
song that goes with it.
The Rainbow Room,
And you can probably say the man who was the host the entire 26 years that this was available publicly. Can you think of his name?
LeVar Burton.
Yep, I knew it.
I was
she's
believe
sharp.
it or not, I was a judge for a film festival that film was in, and we gave it the first, the grand jury prize. So here in SLO Film Festival, it's a wonderful, wonderful film. Yeah, I mean, documentaries take quite a bit of work to put together. And to be honest, when I started this, I had no idea that I was going to be making a film. I thought I was going to do this little web series. I really just knew that it was a passion, that I had to do it. Because I said at the beginning of the show that, I was approaching 50 and looking for positive role models. And so this was a very personal quest. And I think that what happened was, as I was doing the filming, originally I had thought I was just going to be collecting like the words of wisdom of all these wonderful people. But I realized it was also, I was collecting a lot of amazing stories of their journey, stories of resilience, stories of the things that had happened to them. And I will never forget interviewing Marianne Wolf, who, for those of you that haven't seen the film, Marianne Wolf was born in Berlin, Germany, ended up in Vienna, Austria, right before the war broke out. And shortly after Crystal Night, she signed herself up for the Kindertransport, which the Kindertransport was, they were a group of Quakers in the United Kingdom that were trying to rescue Jewish children from Austria and Germany. They saved 10,000 children by fostering them during the war. And she was one of them. And she was on the very first kinder transport from Vienna, Austria. And when I went to interview her, she was 8 years old when she was, transported from Vienna to the United Kingdom. And they put cardboard numbers around all the kids' necks just so that they would be able to identify them. And she still had that cardboard number 80 years later. And I just get chills when I think about it, because I think about what was I doing when I was 8 years old, and what would that have been like for me to go through. I can't even imagine leaving. Her mom, her dad had already passed away, but she left her mom behind, went to a foreign country where she didn't speak the language, didn't know if she'd ever see her mom again. At that moment, I realized that what I was doing was something bigger than I thought, and that I really needed to make a feature film, because I thought it would get out there in a bigger way. Not having ever done that before. I never even did filmmaking before. The only films that I did were like little videos of my grandmother cooking in the kitchen. That was it. But I am one of those people who, instead of saying, why, I say, why not? I follow my passion. I'm not afraid to admit that I don't know how to do something. So I'm really open to asking for help and asking for suggestions. And I had no idea of how to do all this video work. And this was at the time that the Apple stores had this like one-on-one help if you bought a computer. And I would go into the Apple store, and I had these 3 guys in the Apple store, which became my Apple gurus. And they helped me use a program called Final Cut to learn how to put a video together. They taught me about sound. They taught me about all these things that I didn't know. But I never let that stop me from doing it. And why I thought I could do a feature film, never having done it before, I don't know. But I just, I follow those threads, I follow my passion, and I make it happen. And so I was just thrilled when it got into its first film festival. I never dreamed that it would be on PBS. I mean, it's such an amazing thing to have it on PBS, because it is out there in a much wider way. And it has been a word of mouth film where one person tells another person about it. And that's been incredible. And then the book kind of came out as a result of that, because everyone, when they would see the film, would say, oh my goodness, you should write a book about your experience, not only about the film, but about making the film, about your journey. Because, I had no experience making a film. So how do you fundraise for something like that? How do you get the money? And, I looked at creative ways to do that, because at the time, no one was giving a grant to somebody that was working with older adults and doing a film. That was like, I just could not get funding. And so I realized that I had extra rooms in my house, and I started renting out rooms in my house through Airbnb to make the money to fund the film. And what was brilliant about that, although I didn't even realize it at the time, was I would tell everyone that was staying in my Airbnb, this is what I'm working on, and you're helping to fund this film. And so when it came out into film festivals, I had a built-in network of people that were cheering me on, that would go to these festivals all over the country. And it was amazing. It was such a fun way to make something like that happen, and to build an audience of really strong supporters of the work. And the book just, came about because I've never written a book before, but I just felt compelled to, because so many people kept saying, you really should put a book together. And I decided that the first half of the book really deals with my making of the film and the lessons that I learned along the way, which was, some of the common elements that we talked about that the people had in common. That's why it's, resilience and positivity at any age, because I really feel like that's so important. And so the second half of the book, because I am so interested in getting people together, getting generations together, really is all about connecting generations. And so there's a bit about the work that I'm doing and how you can bring that to a university or educational institution. PBS Learning Media has it on their website. So educators grades 5 through 12 can use that in their classrooms and bring that into their classrooms with all the core standards already on the PBS Learning Media app. And then I like the number 40. So I interviewed 40 people who are doing just amazing work connecting generations, from intergenerational symphonies to co-generational housing. And so the second half of the book is all of those interviews. I asked them what got them interested in this work, what their organization is doing, and what do they see as the benefits of connecting generations. And it's that took me about 2.5 years to do that, but I felt like I learned so much and really connected with these amazing human beings that I would never have met otherwise as a result of doing the book. So that's just, I have a lot of energy, thankfully, to keep doing this stuff. And I just follow the threads of curiosity. And I have another saying over my desk that says, your decisions should be made on your curiosity over your fear. And I think that, many times we put our fear in the way of doing something because we think about all the things that could go wrong. And I just kind of put those aside and just think about my curiosity and following those passions, those threads, and see where they take me. And sometimes it doesn't work out, and many times it does. But at least I've tried. At least I've followed that sense of curiosity that I have. So I'm working on 2 films right now, and the book is just launched, and things don't seem to be slowing down anytime soon.
Wow. Before I forget, I really want to thank you for going into the hospital room and giving your dad the tool, the spark, and then seeing him, was it 1 week later?
Mm-hmm.
And that he had put that into play in his life. Thank you for talking about your dad here, where it will be archived on Aging Better Network for anyone to hear even that section. In there, you talked about your grandmother. I see inspiration that you gave yourself in that moment when you're like, Dad, it's not done. You are a complimenter. You are a influencer. You're a change agent in people's lives, because there's someone that's coming in with the weight of the world on their shoulders, and they're not supposed to show you because they're supposed to be there for you. And you're gonna, and then the Airbnb, that whole thing. It was like, I built a network because you were so excited. There was just no stopping. I championed that, complete strangers. And it's like, let me tell you what I'm excited about and what I'm doing. And I'm just not going to stop. I'm going to keep going. I am so glad that I saw so many indicators just on LinkedIn of launching a book and letting people know it's in there. Do you need a lift? Do you want to hear better content about growing older and older and older? Except it sounds like this. They are growing older and older and older. And it's just like, there's more. They have more. Follow them. I love it all. Kitty Norton had sent or left a comment on a post, and she had said, "Oh, I've got it all plugged in. This is what I'm going to watch tonight." So she was watching Lives Well Lived, because you can just stream it from PBS. It's like, I want it now on demand, just like all those things that we're so accustomed to now. It is, I don't have patience with, this show will be on next week. Oh, look, they've ended the season in 7. And I'm like, we just started to remember the name of some of the characters. So live stream, you can take it when you're ready, whether it's your bowl of popcorn and your box of Kleenex, or whether it's your, hey, grandma, let's watch this together. I hear it's fantastic. If PBS likes it, it's good. Even before we started, you were like, wait a minute, let me adjust the lighting. And I'm like, oh, spoken like a true filmmaker. Your first film, yes, you had video recorded things, but your first film, your curiosity over fear. Curiosity is greater than fear, and it equals, adventurous decision making. Just all these things, the candle image, all of that. I just want to thank you for just pouring yourself and what you've experienced into this. And I did watch the trailer for Machisuki.
Mochisuki, yeah. No one can
Mochisuki.
pronounce it. It's okay.
Yay. I'll take all the help I can get, just like you with your Apple. What
Yeah,
was it? The
so
Apple Pirates, the Apple,
right, here's a
the Apple Gang?
little card for that. So that's what the next film that I'm working on for PBS, which is gonna be out next May for Asian American Pacific Islander Month. And, what I loved about Mochisuki, so it came about because one of the people that was in the Lives Will Live film is Susie Edo Bauman, who is Japanese American. It was very important for me to include the history of what happened in this country during World War II and the fact that we incarcerated a group of people because they were of Japanese descent. I mean, she was born in this country and still ended up in a concentration camp. And that was like 125,000 plus people that ended up incarcerated during World War II. And anyway, Susie and I became really good friends, and she invited me to this Mochisuki ceremony, which is where to bring in the new year, Japanese and Japanese Americans make mochi, and mochi is not what you see in the Trader Joe's or Costco. That's the Americanized version. When you're making mochi for Mochisuki, you take rice that you steam and you put it in something called an usu, which is a bowl. It's either a concrete or a stone bowl, and you use these wooden mallets to pound the rice until it's smooth, so that you don't see any of the rice at all. It's just a smooth kind of feeling texture to it. And then they make these round mochi balls. And I think because I grew up in my grandmother's kitchen where, when we were cooking together, that's when the love, the wisdom, everything came out. And I think all of you on this right now could think of one thing that maybe you did with your family around food that brought generations together. And so I love that about this Mochisuki, is that it brings all these generations together through food. I think the other thing that I really liked in the version that will be on PBS talks a lot about the Japanese American experience as told through this Mochisuki ceremony. So even in the roughest of times, being incarcerated during World War II, Japanese Americans still figured out a way to celebrate this Mochisuki, which is a celebration really of hope. Making that mochi is a celebration of hope. So they figured out a way to make the usu, to make the mallets, to get the rice, even while they were in camp. And so I love that story of resilience, that story of hope, and that story of bringing generations together. They still do this ceremony. I was at one in Irvine here in California at Tanaka Farms. Like 2,500 people showed up for this ceremony. It was an amazing experience. So I would love to do a whole series around food and around the traditions that we do that bring generations together. But for right now, I'm starting with just this one, and then we'll see where we go from here.
Wow. Kitty Norton, who is also a filmmaker, she had worked in the industry. She left her job at NBC to return to Oregon because mom was not going to live well on her own due to dementia. And the filmmaking was really about, in my opinion, it is really about the people that reached out to her as she did a blog, and they ended up being so close, even though they were miles and miles and miles away, because they could just contact each other and say, today was terrible. And they would both understand without judgment. And then she hopped into an RV and went around the US and filmed time talking with them. You
Mhm.
know, many of them, first time that she was in 3 dimensions with them and
Mhm.
talking about those times. Some, their, like her mom had passed, and some were still right in it. And just, she said she looked for information or help, or am I even doing this right? What am I doing wrong? Because things should be getting better now that I'm here at ground zero. You also said, I was just looking for something that reflected the positive, the treasure that my family was growing up in a 4-generation family. And it just isn't there, but somebody somewhere must be having this same heart and these same memories, and living this life that was affected by the joy of being intergenerational. And so, finding none, you created it and you didn't stop, and you're not stopping. And I know we've only got a few minutes left. I'm going to pull up, I'm telling my husband, who's behind the screen, that I'm pulling up Caregiver Kit, because I wrote an article and he said, make it into a book. And it's super skinny. And a gal who's going to be presenting, well, she did last night, but I'm going to go to the one next month that she's presenting. She wrote me a letter. It came in the mail, and she said, since you gave this to me, I've let 2 different families thumb through it who come for the same thing. Can you help me know if I'm caregiving correctly, if we're going on this dementia journey the right way or something? And I do have a dementia dimension in here, but it's really about knowing yourself and putting into a physical container something that you'll turn to when you're like, man, I'm just tearing up today. What is it? Is it an anniversary of a loss? Is it because I saw an obituary? Is it because someone just called and said, our dear friend has just been put on hospice? Is it just because I didn't grieve well? Or I just need to grieve differently, and reach in there and get something that is going to help you grieve well because you packed the kit yourself. So that's what my little book is about. Finish up by telling us something that people are going to find in your book.
Well, I mean, I think we've talked quite a bit about what
Yeah.
they're going to find in the book, which is kind of my journey in making the film, the lessons that I learned along the way. Learning about having a sense of purpose, resilience, and positivity at any age, and then also what you can do to do some work in connecting generations. Some really interesting things that are already being done, some innovative work that's already being done that you can be a part of, or starting your own intergenerational network or project. I mean, I do something very simple,
Right.
which is just have a potluck dinner the first Monday of every month, where I have people from the ages of 20 to 90 that come. It's all women. I do it's a women's dinner, but there's no agenda, there's nothing that we need to accomplish. We just gather. And I think even doing something as small as that, maybe making a friend outside of your age group, and just the smallest of things. It doesn't have to be something massive. It can be something small. Start small and work your way up to something bigger.
That, I love it because it's practical. It's the
Yeah.
thing to do. You can do that. A person can do that. They can do it once. They don't have to
Mhm.
promise anything.
Right.
And there's always a surprise. You didn't know that this person and that person were going to say, your uncle worked there, my cousin worked
Right.
there. And then the sparks fly up, and everybody just feels this, oh, I was here when these 2 people discovered each other. And the the things that unify us far outweigh the things that divide us, the things that where we are categorized. And all of a sudden there's this melding and melting together. Thank you so much. I should let you get back to everything you're doing. You're working at Cal Poly. You're continuously launching your book. You're doing whatever it is that you need to do for the 2025 month of May launch of Mochisuki.
Very good. You got it.
Okay, it was totally worth it right there. All righty. And why pounding on rice would be so important to an entire nation, a culture, a continuity. Oh my goodness. We can find things like that in our own lives. Oh, Sky, thank you so much. This was great. I'm so grateful. Hey, Michael Holt. Michael, this is Sky. You're going to listen to the whole thing again when you have a chance, unless you've just been quietly listening the whole hour, because she talks about her dad. She talks about a person who was spirited away from Austria to the UK. She talks about guys at the Apple store telling her how to use something to make her film. Oh my goodness. This is great. I'm so glad I get to listen again. Sky, thank you. Thank you so much. We've had on the screen all the ways to get a hold of you. So people can always find all that information on the screen under today's date at agingbetternetwork.com. And you can find out how to get a hold of her, because I don't know what you're bringing to the table, but she's not done filmmaking. She's just writing. She's like, woo, someone's going to be like, Sky, so Airbnb, we got to talk about that. How did you make that happen? Because I need to fund my film.
Absolutely. Always happy to connect with other people, filmmakers, whatever.
Oh, thank you so much.
You bet. Thank you so much. That's great.
Have a good rest of your day. We're in the same time zone.